Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. This is episode 109 of my podcast for January 12th, 2011. My guest today is Jim Morgan. He is the Director of Body Exterior and Stamping Business Unit Engineering at Ford Motor Company. And we're going to be talking about Lean and product development. And it's a preview to Jim's talk. He'll be a speaker at the Lean Enterprise Institute's Lean Transformation Summit, which is being held right in my backyard in Dallas, Texas, March 9th and 10th, 2011. So I hope I will see you there, and I'm sure Jim hopes to see you there as well. Now, before joining Ford in 2004, Jim was Vice President of Troy Design and Manufacturing, a Tier 1 supplier. In addition to more than 20 years of operations and engineering management experience, Morgan has authored or co-authored several articles on product development and is the co-author with Jeffrey Liker of the book, The Toyota Product Development System, based on the Shingo Award-winning research at the University of Michigan. And he holds master's and doctoral degrees in engineering from the University of Michigan. So I hope you find this interesting, whether you work in product development or software development or in other areas, because we talk here about some common themes about applying lean methods outside of a traditional factory setting and some lean leadership concepts that I hope you will find interesting regardless of your background. Now, to find this episode on the web, you can go to www.leanblog.org/109. And for all past episodes, you can go to leanpodcast.org. As always, thanks for listening. Well, Jim, thanks for taking time out to join us here today on the podcast.
Mark, it's my pleasure. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I've been looking forward to a chance to talk about the Ford story and lean and product development.
Great. So can you start by introducing the listeners to yourself and your background and how you got introduced to lean, and then maybe transition that into talking about your current role and what you're doing there at Ford?
Sure. So in terms of my background, I've been in automotive product development, primarily body and stamping development for about 25 years, I think, altogether, starting out at a Tier 1 supplier and then eventually moving to Ford and the role that I'm in today. In terms of my introduction to Lean, I was extremely fortunate to be at the University of Michigan at sort of just the right time when it was really an incubator for a lot of new lean thoughts and development. I was able to work with Jeff Liker and John Shook and Al Ward, and by extension with Jim Womack, because at the time U of M was working very closely with LEI. And so I was exposed to a lot of the original work in Lean, both in manufacturing and then eventually in product development through Al Ward and the research that a number of students had done, including myself. I also was very fortunate in that I had spent a number of years in industry before I went there, so I had the opportunity to sort of see the other side of product development, non-lean operations. And so I think that made about 2.5 years I spent working not only with those lean thought leaders, but also with Toyota product development, sort of at their highest point, really valuable for me, both in terms of scholarship and in terms of professional growth. And at the same time, I was still working at the Tier 1 supplier, so I was able to apply a lot of the lessons that I learned real time. And see what worked and what didn't. And that helped evolve sort of the model that turned into not only the dissertation that I wrote, but the book that Jeff Liker and I wrote on the Toyota product development system. Then again, talk about being fortunate, just about the time I completed all that research and completed the program at U of M, I was hired into Ford. They were very focused on re-engineering or revitalizing their product development system. They weren't exactly sure what they wanted to do. And so we're looking for people with different experiences. I certainly fit that description. And so I was allowed then to apply a lot of what I learned and developed over that time period at Ford. So it was just really, the Ford story is such a wonderful story. Not only was it an incredible opportunity for me, but it was a chance to be part of the revitalization of just an iconic global company that whose renaissance was led by really new product, right? And so it was clearly a product-led revitalization, and I had the opportunity to sort of be in the middle of all that and apply a lot of what I had learned previously, and also continued to learn. Not only from the leadership at Ford, guys like Derek Kuzak and Al Mulally, but also from Mazda, who was part of the company at the time, and finally from the incredibly talented people that were at Ford. And really, if there's a big sort of learning from all this, is the power of providing some guidance and then allowing people to really enroll in the process or take ownership of the process, and how successful that is.
In working with engineering and design environments, it's just imagine there's got to be a lot of resistance or concern or anxiety people have to look and say, we're not cranking out lots of cars here. This is not a manufacturing environment. So can you talk a little bit about how you introduced the idea of the Toyota product development system as opposed to a Toyota production system, and what that discussion is like?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. The first reaction of most of the engineers that I worked with was not a positive one. There was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of, you don't understand, that doesn't work in this environment. Our work is somehow different. And that's one of the first hurdles that you need to overcome. And one of the ways we did that was just by identifying the tremendous amount of rework that was going on in the process. And the engineers clearly were not fond of having to do all of this rework. And we made it very clear that by applying standardization to processes and to certain product attributes and architecture, we could eliminate a lot of the rework by using process and design architecture attributes that we knew were manufacturable, we knew performed to the appropriate levels to deliver the product attributes, and consequently eliminate a lot of the rework that they were having to do and make the process a lot more efficient. And one of the things that, and so that went on from way up front when they were developing clays all the way through to the manufacture of the tools and dies and things that are necessary to actually produce the vehicle bodies. And you'd be surprised at how pretty consistent the arguments were over time. But one of the things that we reflected on recently was when we looked at the success of the overall initiative, one of the things that we looked at was what we called pulse surveys, which is a survey that all the folks take that is sort of a measure of morale. And, not only did we decrease lead time, decrease our cost, increase our quality, but we improved our overall morale scores by, I think, probably 25% during a period that was a huge restructuring for Ford, a very difficult time. And so I think it demonstrated that once the engineers became familiar with the power of a lot of these concepts, it was a very positive experience for them as well.
Now, back to what you said a minute ago, what's an example when you talk about rework in a product development process?
Yeah, so you would develop let's say, something simple like a hood architecture, an inner hood architecture, that has a number of attributes it has to meet. First of all, it has to be manufacturable, so we need to be able to stamp it out and weld it together. And then the architecture itself has certain performance requirements, for instance, front-end crash or pedestrian protection requirements that it has to achieve. And if you design a unique architecture on every single vehicle on an inner hood, which really doesn't, the appearance of it doesn't matter much to the customer, your chances of being able to manufacture it the first time or having it pass any of these tests the first time are relatively small. By using proven architecture, and so that leads to design cycles of rework, by using a more proven architecture that's just modified to fit the shape of the vehicle, you have an architecture that you already know can be manufactured and does pass a lot of the regulatory requirements.
And was there resistance that, what you would call rework was considered maybe just, well, that's just the way it has to be? I mean, in terms of the tolerance of that time and cost that was added from the quote-unquote rework?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what made it so insidious, Mark, is that a lot of the stuff that was really waste, was rework, was just considered part of the process. And it wasn't until we had the opportunity to point out that in lean systems at some of our best competitors, a la Toyota at the time, they weren't having to do the same level of rework after testing that we were.
So you're going to be one of the speakers at the upcoming Lean Transformation Summit in Dallas this March. Can you give us a bit of a preview of what some of the main themes are going to be in your session?
Yep, absolutely. A couple of things. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ford story and the incredible sort of renaissance that we've gone through over the last few years, in particular the last couple of years, in terms of all the corporate leading indicators like market share and stock price and profitability, product awards, things like that, just to make sure everybody's familiar with the fantastic work that's being done over there. I'll talk a bit about, more specifically in my organization, the changes that we made and the outcomes from those changes. And I'm going to talk a bit about what I call a systems-based or holistic model of high-performance engineering or lean product development that works on or addresses issues within the three key elements of people, process, and tools and technology, and the power of fit or having various attributes of those elements very well aligned, and how much more powerful it is to work on the entire system than any specific aspect of that system. And then I'll talk about some very specific things we did within those key elements and what the outcomes were from those. And then finally go on to talk a bit about the application of lean or a systems-based lean model across a number of industries. One I know you're familiar with, and that's healthcare, but also the opportunity to take on a lot of our current challenges, whether they be environmental, excuse me, or the current economic crisis, or one of my particular favorites, and that's something that I refer to as design for the other 90%, and that's our ability to bring high-quality products to a larger portion of the world's population.
So talking about differences in the products or in the development process for those other regions of the world?
Yeah, so all of the above. Designing for environments and customer needs that are not typically addressed, as well as lean processes, both in engineering and manufacturing, that allow these products to be produced effectively, delivered effectively through logistics to help serve a larger community.
Can you elaborate a little bit? I'm curious because I think this is something that's really transferable, maybe as a final discussion point here, is the leadership model that you plan on talking about. And maybe do you have one example you can share, the idea of leading by asking instead of leading by telling in that very kind of traditional directive way?
Yeah, that was absolutely key to overcoming a lot of the challenges early on was leading by asking, admitting. So if you think about the organization that I was responsible for, was very non-traditional and included what was typically or traditionally a product development organization and a manufacturing engineering organization, as well as facilities, and we had it on a global basis. So clearly there was a great deal, even after 20 years in the business, there was a great deal that I needed to learn. And so it was just logical to ask questions. But also, by asking questions and being sincere, you learn more about your people. You learn more than just the answer that they provide on the surface about their depth of knowledge and their perspective. And you also, by asking questions and really listening and acting on the responses, you help to enroll people in the process, and you help them to develop ownership of the process. And so one sort of high-level example that comes to mind is in our die-making process at Dearborn Tool and Die. Our internal tool shop was not very competitive when we started out. It was very challenging. We had a lot that we could learn from both Mazda and Toyota, and we did, in fact, learn from those companies and implement a lot of those ideas. But the very powerful part of the whole process was when the folks took ownership and went way beyond anything that we had learned specifically from those companies to develop a die-making process that's not only as competitive, but in our last benchmark, in some aspects, more competitive than the folks that we learned from, and with very unique ideas that really became their own. And I think that was the power of enrolling folks in the process and letting them take a lot of ownership of it.
Well, I'm glad you're going to be able to share your lessons and your learning at the Lean Transformation Summit, March 9th and 10th in Dallas. I'll be there, so I'll be in the audience and very much looking forward to hearing kind of the fuller version of the story. But I want to thank you, Jim, for taking time to give us a bit of a preview here in the podcast.
I appreciate the opportunity, Mark, and I look forward to seeing you down in Texas.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.